Hello my friends and welcome to my mech building guide. The most requested thing that I get is how do you build a certain mech, or do I have a pocketbook full of builds, or you know, which mech is the best mech in Battletech, etc. So to answer that question, and I've been thinking about this for a long time, I wanted to make this guide and go through the real exacting detail of why I build mechs the way I am building them in my campaigns. And you know, you guys, when you start a campaign, you're going to get random mechs both in your starting lance and in the missions that you play. I don't know what you're going to get. You don't know what you're going to get. So there's no point in having a playbook full of meta builds, because in the early game, when it really matters, the early and mid game, I don't know what you've got and you don't know what you've got. So you're going to get random mechs, random equipment, random gear, and if you don't have the bits, then you can't make the builds. But if I show you how to make mechs, no matter what they are, then you can always have a great mech, no matter what it is, except maybe the turkey. So let's just pick a mech here. Any mech will do. Let's go with the Shadowhawk. Why not? So let's strip this down, strip the armor. Okay, so we have a brand new mech here. We have a Shadowhawk. How do we build it? So the first thing that I usually do is max the armor, and then trim off a little bit to get to around ton. Usually off the rear or off the legs, something along those lines. Now the question is, why? So we're going to go after the really exacting detail here. So first we have to understand what we get. For 1 ton, we get 80 points of health. And we compare that to, let's say, a medium laser, we get 25 points of damage for 1 ton. So what that means is, if the battle lasts 3 turns or less, in 3 turns the medium laser would have done 75 damage, but we got 80 points of armor. So in that case, it's better to take armor. Now in the 4th turn, the medium laser does 100 damage, and the armor obviously is still only worth 80 points. So then we've made a net loss of 20 HP, and it was better to take the medium laser. Now of course, this is an unfair comparison for the armor, because medium lasers are the best damage per ton in the game, non-support weapon wise, and they generate a lot of heat, and we're not considering the heat. So let's have a look at the heat now and sort of come up with a more reasonable answer to the value of armor versus the value of weapons. Okay, so here I have a graph that shows the damage per heat ton of the medium laser. So in the case of just the medium laser, we're getting 25 damage per ton. Now in the worst case scenario, where we've completely offset the heat by adding 4 heat sinks, now we are getting 25 damage for 5 tons. So we're only getting 5 damage per ton. And that's really bad. Now in the case of 5 damage per ton, the armor is worth 16 turns worth of mitigation. Because obviously 5 damage over 16 turns eventually adds up to 80. And that is a hell of a long time. Your battle with an enemy mech, say in a one-on-one scenario, should not be lasting 16 turns. So in that case, the armor is better than the weapon. And in fact, as we'll come to understand shortly, armor is in fact always much better value than weapons, no matter what they are. But the reasons behind it are quite a bit more detailed. So we're going to explore some of those details now. So if I just change my chart here, I'm clicking on the wrong thing. This is a very professional guide that we have going on here. Okay, so here we have, from my old talk on weapons, the damage per heat ton, the damage per ton, and the lost tech damage per heat ton of each weapon. And what you will find is, if you offset the heat completely, then the average damage per heat ton in the game is 10 or less. That's looking at it realistically. So in this case, we when we fit the medium laser, we fit 3 heat sinks to offset 9 of the heat, and we keep 3 to mitigate against our 33 internal heat sinks. Probably unrealistic for a small mech like this. You'd probably be more like 15 damage per heat ton. But if basically somewhere between these figures lies the truth, between the damage per ton, which is not considering heat at all, and the damage per heat ton. And in fact, if you look at weapons that generally don't generate any heat at all, such as look at this list here. LRM5, 8 damage per ton, not bad at all. SRMs are hovering around the 13 damage per ton mark, which is very high. But in fact, obviously it's energy weapons that usually get away with the amazing damage per ton ratings. But ironically, even like PPCs and large lasers, where you think the majority of their offset would be in how you manage the heat, their actual damage per ton is genuinely not that great. Because they're actually pretty heavy in their own right. It's really medium lasers in particular that overperform here, and maybe SRMs too. So you can quite clearly see here that, with the exception of SRMs and medium lasers, you are looking at 10 damage per ton or less. And your damage per heat ton is going to be exactly the same in the case of low heat weapons. In the case of high heat weapons, the damage per heat ton is going to be lower than the damage per ton. Damage per ton is the highest it can possibly be if we ignore the heat factor entirely. And the damage per ton on a lot of these weapons is not great in the first place, even when you begin to consider the heat. So armor is going to buy you almost certainly between 8 and 13 turns or more in a straight up damage comparison. And that is a lot of time. It's so much time to take down the enemy in. In 13 turns, most mechs could melee another mech to death in that time, especially if they have a lot less armor. So you actually encounter a situation where, like in the AC2 campaign, a team of 4 heavily armored mechs can base melee punch enemies to death before they can kill you in a straight up comparison, because the damage per heat ton on weapons is really, or the damage per ton on weapons is low, so low that every ton of armor is actually of massive benefit compared to simply adding additional firepower. And remembering that most mechs have got, in this case this mech has got a really quite excellent melee attack of 85. Most medium mechs have got, of course, base 55 damage. But 55 damage is still a lot of damage if you're, if you've got, if they've got 4 medium lasers, that's 100 damage. And you've got just your melee attack, which is 55. But if you have several tons more armor than them, your 55 damage is gonna cave through them faster than their 100 damage is gonna cave through you. And the comparison just gets worse for weapons when you start to consider effective hit points. So what are effective hit points? So effective hit points are what your hit points are worth if you factor in evasion and mitigation and all the other things. So you can get a realistic view of how long your hit points are going to stretch for. And this is only good for armor, because obviously the mitigating circumstances make armor last even longer than the direct comparison. Evasion makes it last longer, of course. Damage mitigation makes it last longer, of course. Hiding behind terrain makes your armor last longer. So armor is even more valuable than just in the straight comparison. So anyway, another chart prepared here, and I sort of want to explain two things at once here. One is effective HP, and another one is why light mechs can be tougher than assault mechs, especially with full armor. So I'm going to bring up the next picture. Hopefully paint will cooperate for me. Not that one. Effective HP, here we go. Okay, so in this chart, we see that you have a base hit chance of 75%, okay? We're just going to make this simple so I can explain effective HP. So, a light mech has a 4 to hit penalty for enemies, and a medium has a 2 to hit penalty, and heavies and assaults don't get any benefit at all. So, from a base hit of 75, you have a 55% chance to hit a light, a 65% chance to hit a medium, and a 75% chance to hit a heavy. Now, obviously, I'm just excluding things like gunnery here, and terrain, and evasion, and all that kind of stuff, and make this as simple as possible. So what that means is, if I have, say 500 HP on a light, but the enemy has only got a 50% chance to hit me, then what I really have is 1000 HP, because obviously half of their effective firepower is not going to hit me. So therefore my hit points last twice as long as you would expect them to, and that's what we call effective HP. Now, the reason why lights are so insanely powerful in the There Are 4 Lights campaign, the reason why lights were so tough and so hard to kill, is because as mitigation, as evasion gets higher, it becomes exponentially better. So, if you look at the last part of this chart here, we've got a 50% to hit debuff. So we could just call that 5 evasion tokens, or say 4 evasion tokens and a +2 gyro, or something along those lines. So we've obtained a 50% evasion bonus somehow. Now, when you consider a 50% evasion bonus on a light, in this example, simplified example, there is only a 5% chance to hit the light, a 15% chance to hit the medium, and a 25% chance to hit the assault. But what that means is, you are going to do 3 times more damage to the medium than the light, and 5 times more damage to the assault than the light. So if we throw 500 damage at the light, the heavies and the assaults are going to take 25% of that 500 damage, which is 125. And the medium is going to take 75 damage, and the light is only going to take 25 damage, you know, just presuming that it was a big ball of medium lasers or something along those lines. So, when your HP is being depleted by 125 a round, compared to a light is only taking 25 damage per round, you will actually find that the effective HP of the light mech is higher than the assault mech, because of the way that evasion gets ridiculous as you head towards the ceiling of how much you can evade. In fact, if it wasn't for the 5% guaranteed chance to hit, a light could hit 100% evasion and therefore be invincible, be completely indestructible. It could have no armor at all and you would never kill it because it has a 100% chance to evade, so you could never damage it. And it's just funny how this works, in that last little jump between, say, 15% and 5% triples the amount of damage that you will receive from the enemy because of the way this effect works, or the way this works in math. So, armor is actually, it's almost overpowered. You could call it overpowered. It is always better to take armor than it is to take weapons, because no matter how you fiddle around with these numbers, or whatever you feel is realistic damage per heat ton for various builds and designs, that damage per heat ton will always be maybe 15 or less, no matter how efficient you are with your build. And even at a very generous 15 damage per ton, per heat ton, you're still looking at 2, 4, 6, at least 6 turns to offset armor. And 6 turns is a long time to be in combat. The back of an assault mech plus structure is no more than 300 HP on any mech. So you could be doing 100 damage per turn, like I was doing in the AC2 campaign, and you could punch through somebody's back end in 3 turns. And that's, you know, obviously maximum precision there. But even without maximum precision, you would still be able to get through in, say, 4, 5, 6 turns, even if you weren't using precision strike, at least from the rear. So it basically always works out to be the case that armor is far more important than the weapons are. And every point of it is efficient, as long as you use it, of course. Which is why you often see me sometimes, when I take a lot of damage on the front, a mech that's being focus fired, I might just turn it around and show the rear armor. I brought the heavy rear armor along to use it. So I might, like with ace piloting, I might shoot and then turn my back to the enemy to use up my rear armor and then turn around again. Because I want to maximize my value. But that's a thing of tactics, not a thing of builds. But you want this armor in the first place. So it is never a mistake to max out the armor on your mech. That is exactly what you should be doing. And mechs with full armor should beat mechs with less than full armor, as long as your strategies are good. So the next step is looking at mobility. And the reason why we look at mobility next is obviously because we want this extra mitigation for our armor. We want to get the most value out of our armor, but we don't want to sacrifice. We don't want to needlessly get mobility if it's not necessary. So what you want to do next is you want to look at the movement. So in this case, this mech can move 140 meters. Now we can add jump jets and see what the difference is. So in this case, and I'll just get rid of the. There we go. Just get rid of the chart here. So in this build here, I've just added 4 jump jets. And I'm now going to look at the movement and see, right, okay, so I can move 140 meters, I can sprint 240, and I could jump 150 with 4 jump jets. So 4 jump jets is about the ideal number of jump jets. I think 5 and above is possibly too much tonnage wasted. And often you have a huge engine if you can take 5 and above. And below 3, they don't really add much. 3 is really the minimum number. Once you get down to 2 and 1, the little jumps are really not that impactful. So the question is it worth adding 3 or 4 jump jets? The answer is usually yes, but what you should look at is, when I add 4 jump jets, am I gaining more jump than movement? And in this case, the answer is yes, so I want the jump jets. But if my movement was, if this mech had a base movement of 160 or 170 meters, something along those lines, then I would not want jump jets, because I have plenty of mobility as it is. So there's really no need to add jump jets. Why add jump jets when you already have a great amount of mobility? So for example, I'm pretty sure a Firestarter is one of these cases. So if we have a look at the Firestarter here, and we strip the equipment and we max the armor, okay, and we trim a little bit. In this case, we don't have to trim down to the whole ton because we have support hard points, so we can use that half ton pretty easily. So in this case, if we look at the movement here, we have a movement of 165. So if I add 4 jump jets to this mech, obviously we're going to get to our answer, and our answer is 150 movement. So here our movement is actually greater than our jump distance by 15 meters. So jump jets are unnecessary. They do not provide me with extra mobility, except in strict circumstances where you know, if the map is all forest or all jungle or something, jump jets would give me additional mobility. But it's often not worth the trade. You want that 150 meters of mobility minimum, or 120 in the case of 3 jump jets, for assaults and other heavy mechs that are, you know, by nature unbelievably slow. You want that 130 120 or 150 mobility that the jump jets provide, but only if your movement is lower than that. If your movement is higher than that, which means that your sprint is way further than that, it's really not necessary to get jump jets, because you will, if you need to move, you'll be able to move. Jump jets provide you with that necessary mobility and effective HP and tactical options. It provides you with all those things. But if your mech doesn't have those things, if your mech already has that because it's already very fast in its own right, then there's no need to add them. So consider the movement of your mech very carefully and then add jump jets if you need to. But that's the decision that you need to make based on the existing movement of the mech. So in here, in the Shadowhawk's case, it's 140, so you might consider jump jets. But it's certainly an edge case. So in this case, we can add 4 jump jets here, and we can see that our 150 versus 140. So it's up to us, really. They're quite close, but I would take jump jets because I feel like 140 move is quite slow, and in forest and such, it will probably be even worse. So we'll take 4. I never take 5 because I just don't think it's worth it. It costs you more heat and more weight, and I don't genuinely think that you get a huge extra amount of benefit, because there's a limit on how many evasion tokens you can pick up anyway. So even more distance, generally speaking, doesn't matter. And as long as you play your engagements correctly, 4 jump jets should be all you need to get behind somebody from the front, pretty much in one turn, as long as your previous positioning was good. So make that consideration. The next thing is, where do you put your jump jets? So I've used a couple of designs. One is to have one in each section like this. This makes it the most difficult to disable your ability to jump, because if you lose a leg, then you're technically losing 1 jump jet, and obviously a huge amount of mobility from your leg movement. You still have 3 jump jets left. Now some people use this kind of build, and this build is good because if you lose a leg, then you've got all your jump jets, whereas if you lose a top section, then you've, in theory, still got your legs. But if you prefer jumping to moving, it's easier to disable your ability to jump if all your jump jets are sort of are in this region. There are some meta ways of doing it, which is to put 1 here, 1 here. Oh, that's certain mods that let you put it in the head, which is kind of funny actually. If you haven't, so you have to consider the fact that you're going to have a defense gyro at some point, so you're not going to have 2 jets here, or in this case we have a weapons hard point here. So I think in the case of this mech, this design is probably the best. Either this design or this design. Those are your 2 choices. Obviously, please don't put all your jump jets in your legs. That's this is a horrible design for jump jets, because if you lose a leg, you're going to lose half of your jump mobility and half of your, well, basically your entirety of your movement, because you'll be destabilized when your leg breaks. So this is bad. This is a bad idea. Some people prefer this because obviously on losing 1 section it doesn't matter, or it shouldn't matter. But if you lose the top section first, you are potentially going to lose, you know, 2 jump jets instead of 1. And it depends on how much effort you want the enemy to go through to peel away your jump capability. Because once you've lost 2 jump jets, that's it. Your jump jets are useless to you. So with a spread like this, it does guarantee that you lose 1 as soon as you lose a section, but it also guarantees that you've still got 3 left, which means that your jump jets are still viable when you have 3. Once you're down to 2, they're pretty much not viable anymore. Likewise, you know, you can't lose both legs, because if you do, you're dead. So, yeah, it's a decision you have to make, and depending on the mech, I have done both. Some mechs have got quite chunky legs, and so this design sort of makes sense. And if your torso is particularly chunky, then this design is probably a bit better. But you can't generally speaking put them in the CT. If you could only mount 3 jets, then this kind of design is very good, as long as you don't have a weapon mount in the CT, of course, because you'll have your defense gyro in here when you get it. Now, if you don't have a defense gyro, the absolute best design is to just stick all 4 jump jets in the CT. If you have no gyro and no hope of one for a long time, and no weapon mounts, then you might as well just dump them all in the center, because that's going to be the best protection for them. And if you lose your CT, you've lost your mech. So this guarantees your jump capability for the entire fight. But obviously you're going to want gyro at some point, so the jump jets will have to come out. And likewise, if you've got a weapon mount, then you're going to you potentially want to use that weapon mount. So the jump jets can't reside here. But strictly speaking, this is actually the best design. But once you get a gyro, this design is no longer possible, so you're going to have to pull them out and put them somewhere. This is just the OCD talking, but even though this is quite a good design if you have a gyro and no weapon mount, the fact that it's lopsided makes my skin crawl. If you have a shield arm design in your mech, which is where all the weapons are mounted on one side of the mech, then this design would be superior, of course, because this will be your shield side, so you'll have no weapons here. And this will be your weapon side, if this were a shield arm design. So you're not concerned about this side of the mech. You're going to use that as a wall to protect your weapons and your combat capability. So you actually want the jets on one side. But once again, people who want to play with a bit of realism will find this profoundly uncomfortable arrangement, because it makes no sense aerodynamically. But hey, I'm just telling you how to build in the meta. Okay, so we've decided on our 4 jump jets. I think this design is probably best. So now you place your weapons. And you want to place your weapons based on whether you want to snipe or brawl. So in this case, hard points for sniping, in my opinion, are missile primarily. So this mech's got plenty of missile hard points, so it'd make a great sniper, because LRMs are just the de facto best sniping weapon. And energy weapons or ballistics could both be used for sniping as well, but less efficient. Large lasers are pretty efficient, as are AC5s, pretty good for sniping, depending on ballistic or energy. Once again, you know, going back to that weapon table of damage per heat ton. Or you want to brawl. If you want to brawl, then missile and energy and support are the way forward. We have plenty of missile, support, and energy here, so this will make a fantastic brawler or a good sniper. It's up to us. So if you're going to snipe, I would always say use the missile hardpoints, then energy, then ballistic. If you're going to brawl, use support, then energy, then missile, then ballistic. We'll always choose ballistic last because it is the least efficient hardpoint type. So here we have missile, so we would use missile first. We can only have an LRM-5 here. If we have a gyro, we could only have an LRM-5 here. But the smaller LRM system is actually the most efficient because it's only 2 tons. Then we could fit an LRM-15 just about. And for that we would want some ammo as well. We just check our heat. So you can see here that our heat is actually... our sinking is higher than our alpha strike, so we actually have plenty of spare heat available. In the case of this design, we might consider removing the jump jets because we want some more ammo and the move is okay for an LRM boat. LRM boats obviously can hit from any position on the map pretty much, and so they don't quite need the same mobility as everything else, but you may want to reconsider just having a whole set of LRM 5s. For example, you're going to need at least 2 cans of ammo for this. Favor having plenty of ammo, because if you run out, then you're in trouble. If you've got all these long range weapons, then you want to have plenty of ammo with which to keep firing them. In fact, you might even want to consider an LRM 10 in this particular instance, or trimming a little bit of armor just to get the 15 in and squeeze 2 cans of ammo in. But in this case, we have some extra energy hard points here, and I just want to use them for options. So people have heard me talk about this before. An option is basically something that you use in short range, or when a opportunity presents itself, when you have a particular chance to really hurt the enemy. And so what that means is, LRM 15 here, we've done it with 3 5s because that's actually 1 ton more efficient than using an LRM 15 straight up. We could have had an LRM 15 and an LRM 5 as well. It's totally up to you, and we could strip down the optional weapons here. So for example, if you really wanted to get fully dedicated, I'd be tempted to pull this one out, stick the 15 in, and you have an extra 5 missiles to play with here on the LRM front, and you've obviously given up a few medium lasers for it and a heatsink. I don't necessarily feel that that's worth it, an extra 5 missiles for the loss of the medium lasers and the heatsink. And the reason why is, so going back to this conversation about having options, a lot of the maps are quite claustrophobic, and eventually the enemy will close in on you at some point. And when they do, you want to have some extra weapons in your back pocket to put the hurt on them in exchange for your heat bar. So your heat bar is 100 ammunition, if you will, 100 heat, that you can spend to do extra damage. Remember, medium lasers have a damage per ton of 25, the highest in the game for non-support weapons. So they're amazingly efficient if you don't have to pay for the heat. So in this case, we have a heat sinking of 33, and we have an alpha strike of 54, including the three medium lasers. Now, our 3 LRM launchers are not going to generate the heat to start filling the heat bar, but once the enemy gets into range, we might want to dip into that heat bar to pump out extra, very efficient damage. And so here we have a delta of 21, which is the difference between our heat sinking and our alpha strike. And that means that we can basically dump a good 4 rounds of these medium lasers out before we run the heat gorge too high, and we can't fight anymore with these optional weapons, these weapons in our pocket, which are almost always medium lasers, because it is medium lasers that really suit this role. So if the enemy closes in on us, we could jump behind them and just start lasering their backside as we see fit, or lasering the front if we've already softened them up quite a bit. And it just gives us some extra stopping power when the enemy closes in. There is actually a Goldilocks zone, a sweet spot with LRMs and medium lasers, where if the enemy is exactly, I think it's 140 or 180 meters away. 180. Minimum 180, optimal 180. There's a Goldilocks zone of 180 meters that if your enemy is exactly in that spot, then you can optimally blast them with your medium lasers and your LRMs together, and it makes for a brutal combination. So the optional medium lasers can make a great backup point, an extra set of teeth for your LRM boat. And obviously, if your missiles run out, they will be there for you as well. But what if you don't want to do that? What if you want to do a brawler instead? Now with the brawler, obviously it makes more sense to, or it's better to weight mobility with a brawler, because a brawler needs to be mobile. So if you're factoring in the movement and you're looking at it and you think, oh, you know, movement's 140, max jump is 150, they're very close, do I want jets or do I just want to stick with movement? Definitely consider leaning towards jumping if it's greater, because if you're going to brawl, because you need that movement. And then once again, it's working in reverse order of hard points, but in the case of brawling, so in the case of sniping, it was missiles, then energy, then ballistic, and then support, because support is useless for a sniper. Now in the case of brawling, the order is totally different. It's support, then energy, then missile, then ballistic. So we want to start with support. Small lasers are very good. I favor machine guns when you have 3 or more support hardpoints, because the ammunition, you get a vast quantity of ammunition, and it's quite wasteful damage per heat ton to have 200 rounds of ammunition for 1 or 2 machine guns. But if you have 4 or 5 machine guns, then they're totally worth it over the small laser, because it's worth the heat exchange. But for just 2 support hardpoints, we're going to go with small lasers. Then, working back through our order of things, we then want energy weapons, so we'll start with medium lasers because they're the most efficient. And this is going to be a brawler. Okay, so that's our medium lasers done. Now we have missile hardpoints left over. So once again, probably go with SRM4. That leaves us room for our support gyro. Defense gyro, I should say. Once again, we can only fit a 4 here. We could have a 6 here. I'm going to put a 4 because I think I need ammo. More ammo than 1 can. But you could also potentially put a 6 here, and let's throw in 2 cans of ammo. The correct number of shots that you want is roughly 12 rounds. The 12 rounds of ammunition should be enough, and this is part of the reason why, going back to armor again, why armor is so incredibly efficient compared to everything else is, if a battle is lasting 12 or more rounds, it's just lasting way too long. So 12 rounds of ammunition should be enough, and usually almost always is, unless you're like in an attack and defend and you've eaten your way through like 20 mechs. So in this case we have 12 missiles going, and each can is worth 100. So based on that, if it were 10 to 100, it would be 10 rounds, but it's actually less per can. It's like 9. 8 is okay, actually. You could probably get away with it, especially when you're packing this many energy weapons. But you probably want 2 sets. Now here, obviously the heat efficiency of this design is very bad because we have so much firepower on it. This delta is too wide, potentially. So you'll then want to consider bringing the delta down to about between 20 and 30 heat. So here in this case it's 42, which is a bit too high. So you may want to now look about how to do that. And one way to do that would be to simply reverse the process. So we added missiles last, now we're going to take missiles away to try and get the delta down. So in this case, if I pull some ammo and I pull the SRM4 and say downgrade it to a 2, so now I have precisely 10 rounds of ammunition, and I've freed up 2 tons doing it. So now I could potentially add a couple of heat sinks. And don't forget that downgrading the missile launcher has also freed up heat. Okay, so now we have a delta of 36 over 68, which is 32. So this delta is, I would still consider it to be slightly too warm. especially since we're going to be jumping around. So we can pull this one. By the way, the ammo, I've put it in the side here because it's a lore thing, but for meta purposes you probably want the ammo in the leg, because that's where it would be most protected. But both are actually pretty acceptable choices, so it's up to you. Okay, so now we've got... so funny that this mech in particular has missile hardpoints in the chest and head that leads to this situation. But anyway, so now we have a delta of 39 over 64. So the delta is 25. 25 is an acceptable delta. It's between 20 and 30. That's pretty much what we want. We want 4 rounds until we overheat. So now we've finished our build and we're happy with it. And a firepower of 179, not bad at all for that short range brawling. And obviously the small lasers will also factor into the melee, which is going to be 85 plus 2 small lasers, so 125. So not bad melee damage either, which as a brawler you'll probably always be in melee combat. So you can use your melee to actually cool down in between firing your weapons. Now, if you want, you could take the heat sinks out and put the missile launchers back, and just sort of factor in the back of your mind that your small lasers or medium lasers are in fact optional weapons that you're only going to use when you really need them, and that you're just going to throw SRMs typically. But it's risky. I mean, even with this build, the heat delta is pretty high, and it's a brawler, so you're going to be in short range. You're probably going to want to use all these weapons. So optional weapons make a little bit less sense for brawlers than they do for snipers, because when you're at point blank range you're going to want to use all these heat efficient, damage efficient weapons. So that's the build done, and you just got to apply these skills, or this train of thought, work through this whole process with every mech or any mech that you get. With whatever equipment you've got. So as you're working through the order of things for a brawler, support weapons, then energy, then missile. If you haven't got any support weapons, then you can't fit any. So then you're going to have to just fit energy, then fit missile. If your mech has only got ballistic hardpoints, then you're going to have to fit ballistics, no matter how inefficient they are. If you have an annihilator, you're going to have to fit ballistic weapons because it's only got ballistic hardpoints. So you have no choice. And that's the process that you have to work through in your mind. Armor, mobility, to create effective HP, and then weapons, and following through the order of putting the weapons in, and then going back up through the order to trim or make the design sort of more efficient after looking at the delta. So we fit a ton of weapons and now the delta is too high. Now we're going to remove them in reverse order to get the delta to a reasonable level. So we're putting them in order of efficiency, so the least efficient weapons should be the last ones we put in, and then we take those weapons out to get the delta to a reasonable level. And that's it. And I hope, having gone through all this, that you guys will understand how to build any mech and get a meta design and kick ass with it. And why I always build for max armor, and why jump jets are important, and when to fit them, and the order of placing weapons into a mech, and why weapons are not necessarily the most important thing to have. Obviously you want some weapons, but they're not the most important aspect of the design. They're probably the least important aspect of the design. And in fact, you know, a lot of melee bots like the Banshee can be far more deadly than anyone gives them credit for, because there's still assaults. You can still pack massive amount of armor on them. They've got a lot of support hard points and a good melee attack, so they can still hit you for a good 200 to 300 damage. And that's all you need. That's all you need. In fact, the AC2 campaign proved that all you need is like 100 damage, and you can pretty much destroy anything. So, anyway, that is it for now. I hope this wasn't too dry, but I just wanted to get all these really complicated concepts out there. You can stop asking me for meta builds now. This is the method that I use to build mechs, and if you apply it yourself, then you will be able to build a good meta mech by applying these principles to the design. Alright, I hope that helps you, and I will see you guys next time.